Hello, everybody, whoever came back from coffee break. So we are at war, and it was not initiated by Iran, but it's behind it. It's definitely behind it because it's based on planning, training, equipping, operational room established by Iran in Beirut. And this attack is has this. This is the background of this attack, even if Iran was not aware of what was going to happen on October 7th. So this is a multi-arena, multi-front war, but it's not an all-out regional war. But still, we see that Israeli security stability is undermined along its borders. We will try to understand the significance and implications for the future. So, dear members of the panel, thank you for being here with us. So please feel free to relate to my questions and to the questions of others, the comments of your colleagues. So I'd like to start with Professor Meir Litvak. In this multi-arena war, there are several phenomena. Everybody are part of the axis of resistance, but they don't all behave the same. The Houthis on the one hand, and Hezbollah seemed more disciplined. The Iranian militias acted against the U.S., but then they stopped. What are the principles that guide Iran in this axis that are reflected with the relationship with its proxies? Thank you. So this axis was initiated by Iran. It goes back to the 80s. Iran is not trying to commit suicide. They're not crazy. They actually care about their human lives. So they just established militias that will advance their policy, and Iran is at the back, is not paying the price. So this is what they've been trying to do with Hezbollah and other organizations in Bahrain, Kurdistan, and so on and so forth. What all these have in common is resistance to American hegemony and a resistance to Israel as a proxy or an ally of the U.S. in the Middle East. Now, one more point is that here I would say that for Hezbollah and some of the Shia organizations in Iraq, there's also this religious loyalty to Iran. But with the Houthis, it's a different story. If you look at Hezbollah, the founders of Hezbollah, they are all the followers of the madrasas in Najaf. They're all clergymen. They see themselves as if they're under Iran. They see themselves as proxies, as agents. Wakilis, they are his agents, they obey his orders. So you can see it, Nasrallah, you can see Nasrallah kissing Khamenei's hand. This is the greatest example of what I'm accepting your authority. You are my mentor, you are my teacher. So this is Hezbollah on the one hand, but on the other hand, the Houthis are not Shia from the same stream, but from another stream, Azidis. They were founded independently, and I think that they see themselves as junior partners of Iran. They acknowledge Iran's role, but they don't see themselves as under Iran. A few years back, the Houthis said that the Iranians adopted their ideology, and Nasrallah would never dare say that. So if I had to compare it to a family, I would say the following. Hezbollah is the favorite son. It's the oldest son, the loyal son, actually the contractor of Iran in the Middle East. And the Iraqis are the son who is not under control, and the Houthis are the rebellion's son. But when the Iraqis attacked the Americans, they probably received this instruction from the Iranians. And when they were told to stop, they stopped. With the Houthis, they are more problematic. I don't know to what extent Iran controls them, and their activity against Israel is meant to serve their interests. So we will speak about Houthis separately later, but we want to focus on Hezbollah and the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, and Hamas, of course. And Hamas, which is different from all the others, but it's Sunni, it's not Shia, but still it's within this cycle, and Islamic Jihad is also Sunni and not Shia. Now I'd like to ask you, today it's very obvious the extent of the military threat that developed in the past decade, the tunnels, the missiles, some of the more precise missiles, and for a long time we've had this dispute in Israel. What should we do? Should we allow it to happen? Should we try to prevent it? It's a question that has been in the air for a long time, for a couple of years. So I'd like to start with a question to Tamir, Orna, and Amos. What are the lessons each one of you learned from the multi-arena war? And let's start with Orna, my friend at the Institute. So good afternoon, everybody. So there are many, many lessons from this war. I think it's very different from all previous wars, and one of the most central difference is the fact that we are dealing with a set of coordinated factors that most of them are semi-state. They are led by Iran, and Iran developed some kind of a genius, really, strategy that says, I'm not going to fight, but I equip, I help, I assist, I support this set of entities. They call themselves the resistant front. Now, if we look at lessons that we might have learned, there are good news and bad news. Let me start with the bad news. The bad news is that in every war, in the near future, in any military conflict, we will have to deal with this matter of multi-arena, multi-front war, which requires a different preparation and, of course, larger resources, and it will be difficult for us to obtain our objectives. And this is the scenario that we must prepare for any future conflict we're going to have in the near future. In terms of the good news, I think that the fact that, despite the fact that their main purpose was to disturb Israel in the operation in Gaza, to actually attract the forces to the north and to disturb IDF. Even at first they wanted to prevent ground maneuvering in Gaza, and they couldn't do that because IDF did it anyway. And we see what is happening in Gaza. They also see what is happening in Gaza. So as far as they are concerned, they have very partial success, and they feel a bit embarrassed about what to do in the future, especially when they look at what Hezbollah is doing. So that's the good news and the bad news. So it's something that we can definitely cope with. Now, we can talk about a main lesson, and you ask concretely about preventative attack. It's a matter, it's an issue that we've discussed frequently at the Institute and the INSS, and there are many theories, different theories, and I think that's one of the main issues. In the morning, there was a panel that talks about perception of security. One of the main issues that they should focus on, all those that want to change the Israeli security perception, they should discuss and focus on circumstances under which Israel will start preventative attack, and it could also be something more limited. And up until today, we actually kept it for very exceptional cases of conventional threat, non-conventional, unconventional threat, yes. For nuclear attacks, this is what we did with regards to the nuclear reactor in Iraq and Syria. And I think that what we've seen developing right in front of our eyes, and we saw it happening, there was a development of force buildup in the north and in Gaza, and we decided to contain it because it was conventional and maybe we'll be able to cope with it. And I think that this solution did not work, and we'll have to think about it and see how we find something else to do in terms of our operations. Thank you, Orna. Amos. So I think we should actually plan the balance. I remember in 1996, in the previous century, actually, I had the privilege to present the Intel's assessment to the Prime Minister back then, who was Benjamin Netanyahu, and Iranian threat was in the center, and what Iran had back then was a vision. I would like to go back in time and compare what he said about it then and what he's saying about it now. So it's as if you go to the doctor, you want to know what your disease is. So we are at a very bad place. I can divide it into bad news and good news, but I can only see the bad news unless we do something about it. And I'll be very precise. Let's take Iran, for example. So Prime Minister said, promised that Iran will not have a nuclear power, that together with their ideology to destroy us is an existential threat to us. Everything is an existential threat. If inflation goes up, it's also an existential threat. But you know what? Where is Iran today? According to foreign publications, according to the Pentagon, for example, Iran can move to enrichment of 90% in 10 days, let's say 3 months, okay? But according to General Milley, the American general, in a testimony in Senate, so some of you are more familiar with this process, they prepare tens, so he said that it will take them 6 months. Let's say that Intel director of Mossad says 18 months. It doesn't really matter. It's a very short time. Iran is on the threshold state. And a report of the International Agency for Atomic Energy report was published. They keep on moving ahead with their program. They actually prepare everything. At the end, they'll achieve what they want. So is this our strategic achievement? It's a great concern for me. Number two, the proxies. Who are the Houthis? Most people think that they're just chutim, like threads. It's like a sin. It sounds the same in Hebrew. Houthis in Syria, Bashar Assad. It's so good that his father is now is not alive to see what his son has done, what he made Syria, and he was supposed to be a doctor. So there is Syria. Well, there is Syria, but if it weren't for the IDF, I wouldn't know what would happen. But the plan exists. Iraq, so they take states, which used to be a magnificent states, and like a bug, they eat it from within and they make it collapse. So why don't we do something about it? So why there is no government? The government in Israel cannot decide to go on a preventative attack if it's not necessarily mandatory. And I'd like to see planning. It cannot happen, and they don't want to risk the soldiers. It's not what we do. It's all illusions. There is a balance of deterrence between Hezbollah and ourselves, and let's admit the truth. They managed to make all people leave their houses in the north. It's true that 120,000 Shia left their homes as well, but so what? It is almost been 6 months since it started, and they tried to be very active, dominant in Judea and Samaria, and to make it into a religious conflict. Unless the prime minister stopped at the very last moment, it's like someone who doesn't take for example, we might have had a religious conflict with Islam, and that would be horrible. I don't want to imagine where it might lead us. It might be a horrible scenario. I'm not even speaking about terror and cyber. So when it comes to the balance, unfortunately, we're not in a good place. And what is the solution? It only depends on us, on the leadership. IDF, I always trust the IDF. without even thinking about it. They are the only ones who change the situation. The solution is with a combination between intelligence and military power strategy. And we're going in the opposite direction. First of all, and I want to say a lot about military power, but alliances. The Americans are suggesting a strategic alliance to us with our former enemies. We are part of CENTCOM. Who would believe that our chief of staff is a member, honorable member in this forum? These are many things that the public is not aware of. If we annex Judea and Samaria, there are all sort of delusional vision of Smotrich. So Jordan will collapse. Anyway, it's not that strong today. You have to be very cautious with Jordan because they used to say that King Hussein was about to die in a year, and then he died. He died many years afterwards. So it means that they are very powerful. But power they actually are very attached to the Bedouins and the background. So they actually, without Jordan, we're not going to have a strategic depth, and we have to be very careful there, and you have to be very intelligent. So we are at this junction, and we have to make a choice. I'll give you my opinion as the coordinator of IDF activities in the territories. The IDF cannot manage the civilian matters in Gaza. You need dozens of billions. You need rehabilitation. Let's say the Regional Council of Sujaiya decides to clear the streets. How will they do that if there are no streets? They just need to rebuild them. The bacteria and the viruses are socialists. They kill Palestinians and Jews at the same time. They don't even know how to differentiate between the two. And sewage goes from south to north. So it's going to be a disaster area. And our enemies will take advantage of it, and we'll lose credit with the Americans. The Americans helped us, and we do not actually we don't pay them with the same way, and it doesn't make sense. And you need to look into the Iranian threat. If we miss this opportunity in such a dangerous time like Ramadan, there will be military strategic implications if we don't have an alliance. And we have an alliance for an amazing potentate, for an amazing alliance. Who would believe that the head of Shabak, head Mossad, can visit used to be our worst enemies, but it changes. The Middle East is problematic, and this is our real opportunity. This is the time to be intelligent. With the Iranian axis, we have a positive potential, but it all depends on our intelligence. Tamir, please.
I would correct one thing that you said. The first multi-theater war was in 1948. And that's it. But the first time was when 7 Arab armies plus the Palestinians within the country fought us. The most lethal combination that could have been here, and we prevailed. We won. It was a war where we took a preemptive attack, there was a huge enemy against us. We had scale, all kinds of enemies: Syria, Jordan, Egypt, quite a mess. But we prevailed. In the Yom Kippur War, we had a 2-front war that could have developed into a 3-front war. We also were ready for against Jordan, but basically fighting against 3 armies, dozens of Syrian divisions, and an Iraqi force that came into the region. So, a multi-theater war we will always be the type of war we'll have to fight. But today, we're in a totally different situation, and we've been there for the past several decades. It's not about a war between states. It's between terror organizations. If Sinwar were to have an Excel sheet and look at it and say, okay, how many fighter jets do I have? How many do I have? Oh, how many tanks do they have? How many divisions? How many brigades? How much intel and so on? He would look at that balance sheet and look at the bottom and say, here I have an ant versus a mammoth, okay? Basically, our friends in the north, if they were to do this, do that same, look at the same balance sheet in 2006, they would have reached the same conclusion. But still, here we're talking about an existential threat. It's not pleasant to say this, but 3,000, 5,000 carriers, people carrying arms in Gaza, Kalashnikov, AK-47. Some of them are. They made it. They've smuggled some of them from Israel, some from Egypt, using against the most advanced army in Israel. Is that an existential threat? What are we talking about? We created an existential threat. We created it with our own hands. And the thought that we could manage a military campaign against a terror organization the way that you do it with a state is foolish, and that's gone on for a long time. And that stupid Israeli definition that claims that there's something called deterrence against a terror organization. There's no such thing as deterring against a terror organization. A terror organization has two states. It exists or it doesn't exist. If it exists, it's not deterred, because the prices that they're prepared to pay are unlimited. They don't care about the civilian population or anything else. They have an ideological goal, and that's what they want to fulfill. And it gets struck at. It will go underground. It replaces they replace their magazines. They think about how to do the next step, and that is the vulnerability of the mammoth, and it goes back out on the attack. That has always been the method of operations for terror organizations. Either you destroy them or give them such a strike as they did in Ireland, and then they understand that the way that they will achieve their goals is through a different way, through a political path. To a great extent, the Palestinian Authority tried to do this move to a certain extent. Remember in 1982, who were our enemies in Lebanon? Since the establishment of Fatah. At a certain point in time, that blow caused it to change its position. So which way are we headed? Now, this is the state of Israel never had a strategy about anything. That's the key. It never had a strategy about anything. And if I were to take what happened on 7th of October, and I don't want to talk about why we got there, you can read the report of the Commission of Inquiry in the Meron disaster. If you just change the names and the numbers, it's the same reason. You don't need another Commission of Inquiry. But once that war began, Israel made every possible mistake. And it's continuing to make all kinds of mistakes. You just cannot think that about operational moves when 2.4 million people are in a state of possible famine. We're responsible for their sewage. We're responsible for their health care. We're responsible for everything. So it's best for us to start to understand this. In the military level too, with a glorious, wonderful army with incredible fighters, they know how to win a war that has a goal. Once that war has no goal, the best commanders you might have will lose that war. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, since we don't have too much time left, I would like to ask each of you a question, and you please take 2 minutes to answer. I would like to be left with a little bit of time at the end, as according to what I see here. Amos, I'd like to ask you about the Palestinians, and it's very brief. Is it true, or you have experience in the Palestinian issue? I don't think anybody has as much acquired experience. Has the Palestinian issue become the glue of the axis of resistance, or because this is ongoing, is this the glue that's keeping this entire axis together? There was a dispute that says, or there was an argument saying that you can make a peace without the Palestinians, but that collapsed. It's sad. Following up on what Tamir said, that Sinwar is the one doing it. Now, the bottom line is that we cannot directly control Gaza. I'm telling you that with full responsibility. No sane person would say that. They might say it if they're insane. Now, there are so many distresses and problems there. You need to have a horizon there. What, are we going to chase after every band of thieves there? So what we said, the U.S. president said that the PA needs to be enhanced. What does that mean? I think that my great grandson will be at that meeting. It's like a round. Now, money from the Gulf. By the way, will come in. It might. That's not assured, and then they'll find somebody here that's to blame for it. If rehabilitation comes, then we'll end up with order. Hurrah, Hamas. I don't want to repeat that, but you need some sort of an alternative to Hamas. So we need to constantly look at Judea and Samaria, because if we continue to prevent 120,000 Palestinians from making money, if they have 5 children, what do you want those people to do? If he's a Palestinian police officer and they take away 50% of their salary, would you work that way? We have to strengthen. They'll take money from Iran. I'm saying that the Iranians will finance murderers, not workers. So we'll finance the Abu Mazen's about to celebrate his 89th birthday. He feels that he's never going to die, but I think that he's very close to his demise. Who will come instead of him? That is the key in the world. Otherwise, we'll be dragged not into the Iranian axis, but into an axis of friction with the free world, the Western world, with millions that will be wasted on what? Omer, what is Hezbollah's lesson from this war? Take a minute and a half. I think that the main lesson is that, first of all, it has abilities, and it's demonstrated those abilities. We've seen that there's been that same coastal strip that it's operating has been degraded. It's running a very limited war, but it's also tied itself to some sort of move that's very problematic for them. It can't complete it until things have ended in Gaza, because we created that same linkage because of that commitment to the axis of resistance. It created that linkage, even though it's the Palestinian issue is less important, but it's created that linkage of saying that they'll continue fighting as long as the war in Gaza ensues, and this creates a major difficulty for us. And I'll just briefly say that basically we're also causing a lot of losses and casualties to Hezbollah, but they're within a learning process, and we need to see what we'll do going forward. The main question of whether there will be a war at all or not, Tamir, this is perhaps the most important question for the state of Israel. What do you think the lesson is with regard to Iran and the question of whether it will advance to a nuclear weapon? Iran will progress to a nuclear weapon if it feels that it has the need, a real need to do so. It's a threshold company, and it will stand to gain the most in the past decade from a lack of an Israeli policy. But the risk isn't on the Iranian side, it's on the Israeli side. And in a minute and a half, let me tell you that in one of my meetings with one of the Arab leaders as the head of the Mossad, I met with him, and he began our conversation saying, we, the Muslims, have a dream to wake up one morning and to see between the sea, no Jews between the sea and the river. He looked at me to see my reaction and waited until, and then he says to me, and you have a similar dream, just the opposite dream as the Jews, that you'll wake up one morning and you'll see that between the sea and the Jordan, there won't be any Muslims. And then he says, his punchline, he says, we, the Muslims, woke up and understood that it's a dream. And you, the Jews, think that you can still fulfill that dream. We haven't woken up. We haven't made not one decision since 1967 that determined how Israel wants to see itself in the Middle East. As a result, the Iranians, after the revolution, found the easy way out. That entity that would, if they unite all the Muslims against it, it will use that entity as an axis to lead the revolution. And Iran's monumental success of advancing with its nuclear program, but also acting as an intelligent country with a leadership, with a strategy, opened that axis between Tehran and the Mediterranean in an amazing way by leading the constellations, particularly in its integration and to the war with the ISIS and Syria, we looked at this, and we saw that things aren't going in any positive directions, and it's just at the point where it needs to make a decision whether it would serve their interests to make that last push towards a nuclear program, a nuclear weapon. As long as it doesn't feel threatened, it won't do so. Meir, after 6 months, do you think that Iran has created that axis of resistance? Do they think that it's really demonstrated its worth? I think that yes, Iran, they have a long-term vision. The idea is to bloodlet until Israel collapses, and they have a long-term vision. It's not going to happen in another 2-3 years, but maybe 20 years. And if I can make a comment, I think that Iran, the question of whether it will have the weapon isn't about what's happening with Israel. The more important decision is question is how it's going to affect the relationship with China and Russia. What about the arms race in the Middle East, and what will it do to that? What kind of an effect will it have on its status in the region vis-a-vis its neighbors? It doesn't want a nuclear arms race vis-a-vis its allies. That's what it's thinking about. Now, we had a strategy for Iran. It failed. From the very first moment, it's failed. The nuclear deal with Iran was better than having no agreement, even though it was a terrible agreement. That once, with all of its problems, it was better than the other option. And now we're in a worse situation that we had. There was a strategy, but it was an erroneous strategy. Still, I would like to ask you, because I really think that you've said some very important things, and you all have a half a minute to respond. This war proved to Iran that what? That, look, nuclear weapons are meant for deterrence. I imagine it's not meant to be launched at Israel tomorrow morning. Do you think that Hezbollah strengthened what they think? Because I could argue that despite all of the proxies that are disturbing Israel from morning till night, the war in Gaza hasn't ended. Israel is going on. When the American president on the 8th of October says that he is advancing, or he's bringing the aircraft carriers here to defend Israel, does it have to be weaker or stronger? I think that all in all, Iran needs to be satisfied with what's going on and to feel that the deterrence that it's built, and Hezbollah hasn't used its full forces. Many of its capabilities haven't been used, and it's still a very deterring factor against us. Therefore, in the conventional side, it is deterring, and it still doesn't need the nuclear weapon. With regard to Iran, okay, so first of all, they want to deter us. I always suggest that you can always bring in other types of questions. I don't buy those arguments. Number two, the Iranians are already producing the potential in the option of developing a nuclear weapon. Saudi Arabia is going to exchange ambassadors with Iran, not with Iran. Tehran and Riyadh decided to exchange ambassadors. The same goes for the other Arab countries. They're not even joining the American alliance against the Houthis. And I think that the Iranians are a danger. Now, with regard to whether they will use it or not, I suggest that we remain cautious. You always have to understand the other side. That's my last comment. I know that they're not going to. I want to know that they're not going to use their nuclear weapons if they have it. If they do have one, I remember how Bashar's behavior changed before the Mossad created that change that saved us along with the IDF. All of a sudden he became extreme. All of a sudden Hezbollah came in. All of a sudden he went crazy. They mustn't have nuclear weapons, and we're operating in a way that does the opposite of that strategy. I would like their deterrence is vis-a-vis the United States. They're seeing there's Saddam Hussein in North Korea. That's what scares them, not Israel. Their nuclear weapons threats to us as well, but it's mainly against the Americans. They built 2,300 ballistic weapons, which is equivalent and Israel can't contend with them, with all due respect to all of our wonderful aerial defense systems. Here, the quantity will be what makes it what counts. They have conventional deterrence that's very significant too. They don't even need the nuclear weapon for that. Yes, so their deterrence works. We don't dare touch Iran for clear reasons. With all due respect to the IDF, It's been fighting Gaza for 5 months. Thinking about Israel against Iran, is I don't think that that's the most logical way of thinking. I'm not a soldier; I'm a civilian. But going to war, Israel it should go to war against Iran for the right reasons. They've achieved their goals even without the nuclear weapon. The nuclear weapon is meant to deal with the Americans. For them, we are proxies of the Americans, or we're the tail that wags the dog sometimes. The major threat for the Iranians is Israel, not the Americans. They might be wrong, but that's what they say. So you think that this war basically has not strengthened their motivation to achieve a weapon, not just a broader nuclear program, but to really have nuclear weapons? That's what you think? Look, I don't know what's going through Khamenei's head, but he's a very cautious man, I have to say, to his credit. I think that he fears that advancing to a nuclear weapon will get the Iranians in trouble with the Russians, with the Chinese, with the Saudis, with the Turks, and with the Egyptians. That's what deters him right now. He has taken off the table all of those advantages once Iran is a threshold country. Now, there's also a price. The major problem is what will happen with his heir. In 1984, for Iranian clerics, it's still a piece of cake. I wish him to be healthy because the next person after him could be much worse. I don't want us to have to miss Khamenei. So I see that there's quite a consensus here between you. That basically, Amos, you may not think so much this way, that this war did not strengthen Iran's motivation to achieve nuclear weapons. Amos, before he built in the Iranian timeline, they want to reach the threshold of a decision. Don't ask me who he's scared of more. I don't think that's so important. What's important is that they're determined to invest everything, and they're challenging the oversight mechanisms, and they're waiting for that opportunity to run forward under their own decision. Okay, so I said at the beginning, it's a threshold country, okay? And the distance between, whether I were to adopt what other estimates, or it's between days to a month away from that decision. And it's a strategic decision. As a casual observer and not somebody who knows what Hamas or the Iranian leadership is thinking, they'll manage to reach all of its objectives in the current situation. Even less so. Once it's a threshold country, the decision will be when it strategically serves them. When could that happen? It could happen tonight, or it could never happen. I agree. But I just want to say one thing. If the Iranians were to decide, they would have had weapons long ago, these weapons long ago. So, yes. But right now, they haven't decided to go to the bomb for their own reasons. Because all of the things that we did, it could have perhaps delayed their progress. It definitely couldn't have stopped them. So if they were to want the nuclear weapons, they would have had them. They don't want them right now. What we all agree, and this is at the stage of the facts, as Amos says, is that they have the ability to make the decision. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they didn't have that ability to make a decision. And if the agreement weren't to be violated, then I think that they would be much closer to 2031. What we contributed to led them to the point where they're basically a threshold country now. They gave me a signal. Following up on what Tamir said, I wanted to share my own insight with you. And Netanyahu, who sweared, and I'm talking about him personally on purpose, he initiated an Israeli attack while which disparaging the American parents, which is a horrible thing to do. That's number one. He pissed off the Americans to the point that they made an agreement. It was a bad agreement, and the worst thing to do is to violate that agreement, and that's where we are. It just shows you a lack of strategy. He does have a strategy, and Iran reached that when it's at a threshold state. That's what's been happening in the past decade. And this is what I hope somebody will learn this. So I just want to say that there's a reason why I decided to talk about the nuclear issue in the last few minutes, because everybody understands that this war would look different if Iran were nuclear. The ability of a nuclear state to take conventional risks is much greater when it has that umbrella. Therefore, I think that this question of what the lesson is from Iran, this is one of the discussions we'll have at the INSS. What is the lesson that Iran will take out of this conflict regarding whether it should take that extra mile and go for the weapon or not? Because ultimately, that's the most dangerous thing to the state of Israel. Because in all those other things, with all the great losses, that it can deal with. I think that the first thing that needs to be done is to form the Israeli strategy regarding what needs to happen between the sea and the river and the sea, because this decision will determine what the threat to the state of Israel would look like in the next few decades for our children and grandchildren. And of course, Israel, is running away from making any decision, as always. Thank you very much to the panelists.